Today's story is a love so unexpected, it feels almost impossible, set deep in the wild silence of the Smoky Mountains, where mist clings to ancient trees and the wind carries whispers older than the land itself. This is a place where the wilderness decides who survives, and where two lives from completely different worlds can collide in ways no one could ever predict. She was a woman running from a life already chosen for her. He was a man who belonged to the mountains more than to any world of men. And it all began with something small. An old forgotten cabin hidden in the forest. A place meant for solitude that instead awakened a destiny neither of them could escape. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Smoky Mountains guarded their mysteries like old keepers of the earth, their peaks draped in pale morning fog that rose from deep hollows and clung to ridgelines older than memory itself, older than the first footsteps that had ever crossed those forests, older even than the towering trees that now watched silently over valleys where no outsider had ever truly belonged. Livia Hartwell had come to those mountains to disappear. She had fled the suffocating drawing rooms of Charleston, where every breath carried the weight of expectation. She had fled the endless procession of well-dressed men her mother paraded before her like prized stallions at market men with polished boots, rehearsed compliments, and calculating eyes that measured nothing about her except the fortune left behind by Abram Hartwell. Worst of all, she had fled the terrible certainty that her life had already been decided before she had ever lived a single day of it. Every path chosen for her, every future arranged. For generations, the women of the Hartwell name had smiled politely, accepted their place, and faded quietly behind the gilded walls of respectable marriages. Livia had watched it happen. She had felt it creeping toward her like a slow-moving shadow. And she refused to become another ghost in that long line. 3 years after Abram Hartwell's death, while sorting through his old papers, she had discovered the deed to his forgotten hunting cabin deep in the Smoky Mountains. The place had been untouched since his passing, a lonely outpost, hidden far from any road. To Livia, it felt like salvation, remote enough that no curious visitor would bother with the journey. Wild enough to remind her that the world held more than lace gloves and polite tea conversations. Isolated enough that she could finally breathe without feeling the crushing pressure of Charleston society closing around her throat. So she lied. She told Elspeth Hartwell she would be visiting Lydia Mercer in Savannah. She informed her maid Prudence Hale that her services would not be needed for some time. Then she packed a single trunk with sturdy clothes supplies enough for a month and vanished into the mountains without the slightest intention of returning to the life she had abandoned. What she had not expected was him. He appeared on the third morning of her solitude. Livia had been sitting on the porch of the cabin with a tin cup of coffee in her hands, watching the early sunlight push through the drifting fog, while birds sang their wild morning chorus through the forest. Then something moved along the tree line. A figure stepped out of the mist. He did not arrive with noise or warning. One moment the woods stood empty, the next he was there emerging from the drifting fog as if the mountain itself had shaped him from the shadow and breath. He stood still, studying her. His eyes were dark, deep as rain-soaked earth, carrying a calm intensity that made Livia's pulse stumble in her chest. Apache. She recognized it instantly. Her father had spoken of the people who still walk the hidden wilderness during those long evenings when he returned from hunting trips. As a girl, she had devoured every book she could find about the tribes who had lived on the land long before Charleston existed. The world beyond Charleston's manicured gardens had always fascinated her. But especially the people who had belonged to this continent long before men like Abram Hartwell ever claimed pieces of it on paper. Years ago, the government had driven many Apache bands west, but not all of them had left. Some vanished into the mountains, instead refusing to abandon the land that held the bones of their ancestors. Their descendants still moved through these forests unseen by most. If you knew where to look, the man before her was tall and lean, built with the quiet strength of a hunting cat resting before the strike. Dangerous, perhaps, but not threatening. Every movement controlled, every motion deliberate. He wore a mixture of buckskin and settler cloth, the clothing of someone who walked between two worlds, yet fully belonged to neither. His hair was long and black as a raven's wing, falling past his shoulders in a way that would have scandalized Charleston society instantly. His face looked as though the mountains themselves had carved its sharp cheekbones, a firm jaw, and steady lips set in a line of cautious judgment. A rifle rested across his back. A knife hung at his belt. Yet his hands remained relaxed at his sides, empty and open. He stood there the way a deer listens in the forest, alert, ready to move at the slightest sign of danger. "This land belonged to my father," Livia said suddenly. The words left her mouth before she'd even decided to speak. The sight of him had stolen the air from her lungs, leaving her grasping for something sensible to say. "This cabin is mine now, I suppose," she added, trying to steady her voice, "though I never expected to inherit it." The man's face did not change, but something flickered in his dark eyes, perhaps amusement, perhaps something deeper. "The land belongs only to itself," he replied. His voice was low and steady, carrying a cadence she had never heard before. Certain sounds softened, others stretched into a rhythm that almost sounded musical. The sound of it made her want to hear more. "This place existed before your father," he continued. "Before mine. Before any people who have ever called it home." His gaze remained fixed on her. "We are only travelers passing through." After a moment, he spoke again. "Your father and I had an understanding. I hunt these woods and keep away those who would ruin them. Poachers, trespassers, men who take more than the land can give." He gestured toward the distant trees. "In return, I draw water from the spring on the eastern slope. And when winter comes hard, I shelter in the old cave beyond the ridge." A pause followed. "He never told you?" It wasn't phrased like a question, but Livia answered anyway. "Toward the end. My father spoke very little," she said quietly. "The fever took his mind long before it took the rest of him. The man who died in that Charleston bed was not the father I knew growing up." She set her coffee aside and rose to her feet. Livia Hartwell was taller than most women, though the stranger still stood half a head above her. She suddenly became aware of every detail of her appearance. Her hair hung loose and unbrushed. Her dress was plain cotton, something no Charleston lady would ever wear outside private quarters. Her bare feet rested against the rough porch boards. Yet none of that made her feel as exposed as the way his eyes seemed to look straight through her. "My name is Livia Hartwell," she said firmly. "If you truly had an agreement with Abram Hartwell, then I see no reason it cannot continue. These mountains are large enough for both of us." Again that faint, unreadable spark passed through his gaze. "The white men who write records call me Tahoma," he said, "a name they can place in their ledgers and treaties." His voice lowered slightly. "But my people call me something else, a name that carries meaning our language holds, and English does not." He inclined his head in a small gesture of respect. "I will not disturb you, Livia Hartwell. Most days you will not even know I am here." With that he turned, and just like that he disappeared. The mist swallowed him as silently as it had delivered him. For several long seconds, Livia simply stood there on the porch, staring at the empty trees, while her heart beat strangely fast. Her peaceful refuge suddenly felt far less simple than it had the day before. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the quick rhythm of her pulse. It's only surprise, she told herself quietly. Only the shock of discovering another human being in the wilderness she had chosen for solitude. She repeated that explanation several times as the morning continued. But none of those explanations could account for the warmth now stirring low in her stomach, or the lingering sensation on her skin where Tahoma's gaze had touched her. During the days that followed, Livia Hartwell rarely caught sight of Tahoma again. Yet his presence lingered around her, like a quiet shadow she could never quite turn fast enough to see. Sometimes it was only a flicker of motion at the edge of her vision, while she walked the narrow forest trails. Other times it was a faint stirring in the trees behind her, or a prickling sensation along the back of her neck that made her certain someone was watching even though the woods appeared empty. Still, signs of him revealed themselves in small, thoughtful ways. One morning, she opened the cabin door to find two freshly caught rabbits resting neatly on the porch railing. They had already been cleaned and prepared for cooking, their fur untouched by any wound she could see. Another day she discovered that a heavy pine that had fallen across the narrow trail leading to the spring had been cut away. The slices were so smooth they hardly looked like the work of an axe at all. Then there were the bundles of herbs. They began appearing tied carefully with sinew and hanging beside her door. Livia did not know all their uses, but their meaning felt clear enough. Rosemary for memory, lavender to calm a restless mind, sage for cleansing, and several others she could not name, plants whose scents slipped quietly into her dreams and filled them with half-formed images that faded the moment she woke. Only then did she begin to understand. Tahoma was watching over her, just as he had once watched over Abram Hartwell's land. He moved through the forest like a silent guardian, bound by an agreement she only partly understood. By all rights, the knowledge should have frightened her. She was a woman alone in the wilderness, far from any town or help with a stranger studying her habits and movements from somewhere beyond the trees. Yet the feeling that settled in her chest was not fear. It was something far stranger. Comfort. His unseen presence gave her a sense of safety she had not expected, allowing her to settle into her solitude instead of constantly glancing over her shoulder. Eventually, Livia began leaving small offerings of her own. A pinch of tobacco taken from Abram Hartwell's old hunting pouch. A small sack of precious salt, something hard to come by in the mountains. One evening, she even left a worn book of poetry on the porch rail, wondering if he might enjoy it, though she had no proof he could read. The book vanished sometime during the night. 3 days later, it returned. Thin strips of bark had been tucked carefully between several pages. Each marker rested beside passages that spoke of the wilderness of solitude, of loving something you could never truly possess. Livia traced those small markers with her fingertips. A tight ache formed in her chest. And slowly she began to realize something she had not understood before. Tahoma was not merely a silent protector honoring an old agreement. He was a man. A thoughtful, intelligent man, capable of feelings that reached beyond the invisible line dividing their two worlds. She caught herself thinking about him at the strangest times. While kneading dough in the small cabin kitchen, her hands moving in a steady rhythm that strangely matched the beat of her heart. While reading by candlelight during the long mountain evenings when her gaze would drift from the page to the dark window, as though expecting his reflection to appear there. Even in bed, listening to the night sounds of the forest settling into silence, she wondered where he might be. Was he lying beneath the open sky, somewhere awake beneath the same stars? Was he thinking of her the way she had begun thinking of him? She wondered where he slept, what he ate, whether he had family somewhere in the mountains, or if loneliness walked beside him the same way it had followed her for so many years. Most of all, she wondered about the name his people used for him, the one he had said he did not share easily. And she wondered what it would take to earn the right to speak it. As the days warmed and summer settled across the mountains in a blanket of deep green and golden sunlight, the spring on the eastern slope became Livia's favorite place. Cold water bubbled from beneath moss-covered stones into a natural pool perhaps 10 feet across. In the center, it was deep enough to submerge, completely fed by underground streams that kept the water clear and cold even in the fiercest heat. Ancient oaks and tall hickories rose around it like pillars in a woodland cathedral. Their branches wove together overhead, forming a canopy that broke the sunlight into shifting patches of gold across the surface of the water. Ferns grew thick along the edges, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and green leaves mixed with the sharp, mineral breath of the spring. Livia began bathing there in the late afternoons. By then, the sun slanted low through the trees, turning the water into something that shimmered like molten amber. The day's heat pressed heavily on the valley, and slipping into the cool spring felt like washing away the entire world. In time, she grew bold in her isolation. She left her clothes folded on a smooth rock nearby and slipped naked into the water with a freedom she had never known in Charleston. There she had never truly been alone. Servants were always near. Livia Hartwell's watchful eyes followed every movement. Even the invisible rules of polite society seemed to linger in the air around her. But here she could simply exist. Not only without clothes, but without the expectations that had wrapped around her life like armor for 26 long years. She could breathe. She could move. She could be entirely herself. She did not realize Tahoma had been watching, until the day she decided to test the feeling growing in the back of her mind. At first, it was only a faint suspicion, a warmth along her spine that felt less like danger and more like the brush of unseen breath across her skin. Then she noticed small things. A branch bent where someone had passed recently. Large footprints pressed into soft soil near the spring. A patch of flattened ferns on the small rise overlooking the water, just the sort of place someone might lie unseen and watch the clearing below. At first, she dismissed the signs. Perhaps she was imagining them. Perhaps her thoughts had begun shaping the world around her. But the clues continued appearing one after another until the truth became impossible to ignore. Her bathing place was not nearly as private as she had believed. Another woman might have been outraged. Another woman might have stormed into the forest shouting accusations, threatening to report him to authorities, or abandoning the spring altogether. Livia Hartwell felt something entirely different stir inside her. A dark and thrilling curiosity that quickened her breathing and warmed her skin with anticipation. She wanted him to watch. The realization shocked her and thrilled her at the same time. She wanted those deep, watchful eyes on her. She wanted to know what it felt like to be truly seen by a man who moved through the world like drifting smoke, untamed and answerable to no one. All her life, she had been admired without ever being understood. Men had looked at her the way buyers inspected fine horses at auction, measuring her value in land wealth and family name. Cole Branson and others like him had offered polished smiles and empty compliments, while calculating the fortune Abram Hartwell had left behind. Even her own mother had studied her, like an investment, searching for any flaw that might lower her worth in Charleston's marriage market. But no one had ever looked at her with honest hunger. No one had ever desired her without calculation. The thought that Tahoma might want her not for wealth, not for status, but simply for herself, sent a deep tightening through her body. It made her feel powerful in a way she had never known. Powerful not in spite of her body, but because of it. So that afternoon, she walked toward the spring with a strange sense of purpose she could barely explain. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. Her skin burned with anticipation. Part of her insisted she was being foolish, that perhaps he would not even be there, that everything might exist only in her imagination. But another part of her knew better. She could feel him watching even now. His unseen attention rested against her skin like sunlight. When she stepped into the clearing, the spring lay before her, glowing beneath the late afternoon light. The waters shimmered softly where the underground current stirred its surface. Livia walked to the flat rock where she always left her clothes and paused there for a moment, breathing slowly, as she prepared herself for what she was about to do. Then, with deliberate calm, she began to undress. The late afternoon light shimmered across the surface of the spring, gentle ripples spreading outward, where cold water pushed steadily up from the stones below. Livia Hartwell stepped toward the broad flat rock where she always placed her clothes. She paused there for a moment, drawing in a long breath as if steadying herself before crossing an invisible line. Then, with calm deliberation, she began to undress. She moved slowly, almost ceremoniously, letting each small motion linger longer than necessary. Her fingers worked their way down the row of buttons along the front of her simple cotton dress, separating the fabric to reveal the pale chemise beneath. When the last fastening loosened, she slid the dress from her shoulders and allowed it to fall quietly to the ground. Grace had been drilled into her since childhood, and even now those lessons guided the way she moved. She stepped out of the fallen dress, then lifted the chemise over her head in one smooth motion that raised her arms high and arched her back toward the light. For a heartbeat, she held that posture before letting the thin garment drift down beside the rest. Only her corset and drawers remained, the final barrier between her body and the mountain air. She paused again, fingers resting lightly against the laces of the corset. Livia did not turn toward the tree line where she believed he might be hiding. She did not need to look. She could feel him. The weight of his gaze pressed against her skin as surely as if he stood beside her. Somewhere in the woods, a man was holding his breath, fighting the pull of instinct that must have been urging him closer. The corset loosened and slipped away. Livia drew in a deep breath as her ribs expanded freely for the first time that day. Her breasts lifted naturally, freed from their confinement, their tips tightening instantly in the cool mountain air. She hooked her thumbs into the waistband of her drawers and slowly slid them down her hips and along her legs. She stepped free of them with careful slowness. And then she stood there, completely bare. For a long moment she remained at the edge of the pool, giving the unseen watcher time to look. The air brushed across her skin, cool enough to raise small shivers along her arms and tighten the sensitive peaks of her breasts. The sensation balanced somewhere between pleasure and ache. She knew exactly how she looked. Elspeth Hartwell had trained her daughter to examine herself with the same calculating attention used to judge table settings, etiquette, and marriage prospects. Livia had studied her own reflection often enough to know every detail. Her breasts were full and high, firm with youth. Her waist curved inward before widening into generous hips that corsets often exaggerated, but never truly created. Her legs were long and shapely, her ankles slender, her feet small. Her skin was pale and smooth, untouched by sun or labor. And between her thighs rested the dark, hidden shadow that drew the eye while guarding its secrets. She had always understood she was beautiful, but only as an abstract fact. Standing naked beneath the warm golden light, While a man watched her with unmistakable hunger, she felt that beauty transform into something else entirely. Something that belonged to her. Something powerful. Slowly she stepped into the spring. The cold water climbed around her ankles, then her calves, then her thighs. She gasped as the chill wrapped around her body, the sensation sharp enough to steal her breath. She continued deeper until the water reached her waist, swirling gently just beneath the swell of her breasts. The cold made her nipples harden painfully, sending a strange, electric shiver across her skin. Livia leaned her head back and let her hair spill freely down her back. The movement arched her body toward the sunlight and lifted her chest above the water. She knew exactly what the pose suggested. A spirit rising from the water. A woman who understood her own allure and did nothing to hide it. Her hands slid slowly upward along her sides. She felt the shape of her ribs beneath her palms, the curve of her waist, the fullness of her breasts. She cupped them gently and lifted them for a brief moment, as though offering them to the forest itself. Her thumbs brushed across her tightened nipples, sending sudden sparks of sensation racing through her body. Then her hands drifted upward to her shoulders, before gliding slowly down her arms. The movement was both invitation and challenge. She knew perfectly well what she was doing. This was a performance, and knowing that someone was watching made her feel powerful in a way she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like Livia Hartwell of Charleston. She felt like something wilder, a creature made entirely of sensation and desire. Enjoying the view, she called softly. Her voice was low teasing, pitched just loud enough to carry through the clearing. It was exactly the kind of remark that would have caused Elsbeth Hartwell to faint in scandalized horror. Silence answered her. Only the gentle bubbling of the spring and distant bird calls filled the air. For a moment, doubt fluttered in her chest. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps he was not there at all. Perhaps she had just made a ridiculous spectacle of herself for nothing more than a few curious squirrels and singing birds. Then the branches parted. Tahoma stepped out of the trees. At once, every doubt vanished. He looked as though the mountain itself had shaped him from stone and shadow. His body was rigid with restrained strength, every line of him tight with tension. His dark eyes burned with such fierce intensity that Livia felt her breath catch. His fists hung clenched at his sides. The muscles along his forearms stood out sharply beneath sun-browned skin, while his chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. He was fighting something inside himself. Yet he did not look away. He did not apologize or pretend innocence. Tahoma simply stood at the water's edge, his gaze moving slowly across her body. The weight of that look felt almost physical, like invisible hands tracing the line of her skin. "More than you realize," he finally said. His voice sounded rough, strained by the effort of holding something back. "More than I should. More than is wise. More than any sensible man would allow." His jaw tightened. "I should not be here. I should never have watched you. A man with honor would turn around right now and walk away. And yet, you're still standing there," Livia replied calmly. She surprised even herself with the steadiness of her voice. She stepped forward through the water. The movement lifted her body slightly higher above the surface, and she saw his eyes follow the motion instinctively. He inhaled slowly, as though catching her scent on the wind. Another step brought her closer to him. From this distance, she could see the quick pulse beating in his throat. "Tell me something, Tahoma," she said quietly. "Is honor what's keeping you rooted to that spot? Or is it fear?" Her eyes held his. "Fear of what might happen if you stop pretending you don't want exactly what I'm offering." A dangerous spark flashed in his gaze. You have no idea what you're offering, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. You are a woman from Charleston, raised in a world far removed from everything I am. Your people have taught you that men like me are dangerous, that we take what we want without asking. He held her gaze steadily. And perhaps they are right. Maybe I am dangerous, Tahoma said quietly. Maybe I am exactly the kind of man your people warned you about. He stepped closer to the water's edge. Livia saw his hands tighten, then loosen again, as though he were wrestling with something inside himself. Because what I want right now, he continued, voice low and strained, is to walk into that water, take you in my hands and feel your skin against mine. I want to taste your mouth. I want to learn every line of your body. His gaze held hers without wavering. I want to make you forget everything you have ever known. Accept the feeling of me inside you. There was no mask left on his face now. No distance. No restraint hiding the truth. Only raw desire. Tell me to leave Livia, he said softly. Tell me now while I still have the strength to walk away. For a moment, Livia Hartwell considered it. Every lesson she had been taught since childhood rose up inside her mind. Every warning whispered about men like him. Every rule that defined how a proper woman should behave. She imagined Elspeth Hartwell's face. If she could see her daughter standing naked in a mountain spring with a man watching her like that. She thought of the men she had rejected in Charleston, Cole Branson, and the others men who would have given her comfortable homes, respectable marriages, and lives carefully fenced in by expectation. And then she stopped thinking. Come in, she said quietly. Her voice did not shake, though her heart pounded so violently she could feel it in her throat. The water's cold, she added softly. But I suspect I could use a little warmth. For several long seconds, Tahoma did not move. The tension in his body was visible in every line of a muscle. It was as if invisible chains held him in place. Livia could almost see the struggle behind his dark eyes, duty fighting against desire, honor, battling with hunger. Everything he had ever learned about the distance between their worlds was warring against the instinct that pulled him toward her. Then something gave way. She saw it happen. The resistance inside him shattered like brittle glass, and his decision settled across his face with quiet certainty. Tahoma reached for the hem of his shirt and pulled it over his head in one swift motion. The sight stole the breath from Livia's lungs. He was beautiful, but not in the soft, carefully groomed way of Charleston gentlemen. His beauty belonged to wild places, to mountains, to storms. His skin glowed copper beneath the golden sunlight, stretched tight across powerful muscles, shaped by years of hunting and survival. Scars crossed his body like faded maps of battles she could only imagine. A jagged mark cut across his left shoulder, the memory of some old blade or bullet. Another scar curved along his ribs, pale against darker skin. His stomach was flat and strong, narrowing into a deep V that disappeared beneath the waistband of his buckskin leggings. He slipped off his moccasins and set them aside. Then his fingers moved to the laces at his waist. He paused. His eyes met Livia's one last time. A final chance. A silent offer for her to stop this before it crossed the line neither of them could return from. Livia answered by stepping closer. The waters swirled around her waist as she moved, leaving nothing of her body hidden. Her meaning was unmistakable. Tahoma's leggings dropped to the ground. Livia's breath caught as she took in the full strength of him, the powerful build of his thighs, the lean line of his hips, and the unmistakable sign of his desire, rising between them. He was larger than she had expected. Far larger than the clumsy memory of the one brief encounter she had experienced years ago had prepared her for. For a fleeting instant, uncertainty flickered through her, but it vanished just as quickly, because beneath the flutter of nerves was something stronger. Hunger. And that hunger grew with every moment she looked at him. Tahoma stepped into the water. 3 long strides closed the distance between them. The spring parted around his body as though the water itself recognized his presence. Then his hands closed around her waist. He pulled her against him with such force that the breath rushed from her lungs. Every inch of her body pressed against every inch of his. His chest was hard beneath her breasts, his stomach flat against her belly, and the firm heat of his arousal rested against her hip. His arms locked around her like bands of iron. The contact was electric. Even in the cold water, his skin burned with warmth. His heartbeat thundered against her chest so strongly that it seemed to drive her own pulse into the same rhythm. "I have watched you," Tahoma murmured near her ear. His voice was rough, and his breath brushed hot against the sensitive curve of her neck. "Every day since you came to this mountain." His grip tightened slightly as he spoke. "I have watched you walk through the forest with your head held high, like a queen claiming her land. I have watched you on the porch in the mornings with your coffee, your face turned toward the rising sun." His lips brushed her skin. "And every time I have imagined tracing the line of your throat with my tongue." His voice grew deeper. "I watched you come to this spring and give yourself to the water. And I burned." He drew her closer until their bodies were almost fused together. "Livia," he whispered, "I have burned with wanting you, until I thought it would consume me." She felt the pulse of his arousal against her stomach. "I have wanted you in ways I believed I had forgotten how to feel. Nights without sleep, a body aching for something I told myself could never belong to me." His voice softened. "And now you are here, in my arms." His forehead rested briefly against hers. "I cannot remember why I ever tried to stay away." Livia answered him the only way she could. She rose onto her toes and pressed her mouth against his. The kiss held every ounce of desire she had been holding back since the moment she first saw him step from the mist. Tahoma made a deep sound in his throat, half growl, half groan. His hand slid into her wet hair, gripping gently as he tilted her head and took control of the kiss. His tongue moved against hers with a boldness that made her knees weaken. The taste of him was wild. Forest air, cold water, earth and wind. His mouth explored hers thoroughly, claiming her with a certainty that left no doubt. Livia clung to his shoulders to keep herself upright, her fingers digging into the powerful muscles of his back. Soft sounds escaped her lips, sounds she had never made before, rising from somewhere deep and instinctive inside her. They stumbled together toward the bank of the spring, still kissing their hands, moving across each other with growing urgency. Tahoma's palm slid down her back, tracing the line of her spine. When they reached the curve of her hips, he gripped her firmly and lifted her. Livia gasped as her legs wrapped instinctively around his waist. The movement pressed his arousal directly against her center, sending sparks of sensation through her body that made her shiver. Without breaking the kiss, he carried her out of the water. The cool mountain air rushed across her skin as he laid her down gently on a thick bed of moss that cushioned her like a living mattress. And then he lowered himself over her, the warmth of his body covering hers completely. The cold spring water had barely left Livia Hartwell's skin before the cool mountain air rushed across her body, making her shiver. But the chill lasted only a moment. Tahoma lowered himself over her almost instantly, his warmth surrounding her like a living fire. The weight of him pressed her gently into the mossy earth, and the only thing she could feel now was his skin against hers, solid, real, overwhelming. He held himself above her on his forearms, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that felt as if he could see every secret buried in her soul. "Tell me to stop," Tahoma said hoarsely. His voice was rough with desire. "Say the word, and I will walk away. I swear it. It might destroy me, but I will do it. I will leave this place and never touch you again." His gaze never left hers. "The choice must be yours, Livia. I will not take what you do not give freely." Livia lifted one hand and gently touched his face. Her fingers traced the strong ridge of his cheekbone, the firm line of his jaw, the softness of his lower lip. When she reached the faint scar curving along his chin, she followed it slowly with her fingertip. Tahoma's eyes closed for a brief moment, his body shuddering beneath the quiet tenderness of her touch. "If you walk away now," Livia whispered steadily, though her body trembled beneath him, "I will track you through these mountains myself and finish what we started." Her eyes held his. "I am not a woman who changes her mind, Tahoma, and I certainly do not leave things unfinished." She drew his face down toward hers, stopping just before their lips touched. "So stop talking," she murmured softly, "and put your hands on me." The smile that spread across his face changed him completely. For a moment, the fierce warrior vanished, and something younger appeared in his expression, almost boyish, despite the fire burning in his eyes. "You are a dangerous woman, Livia Hartwell," he said quietly. Then he kissed her again. His mouth claimed hers with hungry certainty, and his hands began to move over her body as if memorizing every inch of her. Thought disappeared from her mind completely. Tahoma explored her slowly at first, with a patience that almost felt like torture. His fingers, lips, and tongue traced every curve and hollow of her body with careful devotion. He kissed along the edge of her jaw, then down the long line of her throat. When he reached the place where her pulse beat beneath the skin, he lingered there, sucking gently, until her breath caught. His tongue followed the delicate line of her collarbone before dipping into the hollow at the base of her throat. Then he moved lower. When his mouth closed around her nipple, Livia cried out and arched up from the moss beneath her. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as waves of sensation rushed through her body. He suckled her slowly, almost reverently. His teeth grazed the sensitive peak, while his tongue circled it in deliberate patterns that sent shivers through her. One hand rose to her other breast, kneading softly, while his fingers rolled the tightened nipple between them. The rhythm of his touch matched the pull of his mouth, building a strange, rising pressure deep inside her. Livia had never imagined her body could feel like this. The sensations traveled from her breasts down through her entire body, gathering in the aching space between her thighs until the pressure demanded release. "Please," she gasped. The word escaped before she fully understood what she was asking. "Please, Tahoma." I know what you need," he murmured against her skin. His breath was warm between her breasts. "And you will have it. Every bit of it. But first, let me learn you." His lips continued downward, leaving a trail of kisses along her stomach. When he reached her navel, he paused, letting his tongue slip gently into the small hollow. Livia's hips jerked upward instinctively at the unexpected sensation. He smiled against her skin. Then his mouth traveled lower still, his lips brushing the soft curve of her lower belly. His breath warmed the dark curls between her thighs. When he reached the center of her legs, he stopped, Tahoma lifted his head and looked up at her, his gaze meeting hers across the length of her body. "Among my people," he said quietly, almost reverently, "we believe a woman's pleasure is sacred. The sounds she makes when she finds release are prayers to the spirits, songs of gratitude for the gift of life." His eyes held hers. "Will you pray for me, Livia? Will you let me hear the song your body can sing?" No man had ever touched her there before. The pleasure spread through her body, in waves each stronger than the last. She heard herself making unfamiliar sounds, soft cries, and breathless moans that seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside her. Her fingers tightened in his hair, unsure whether she was pulling him closer or pushing him away. Everything was too much, and still not enough. Then she felt something new. His fingers slipped gently inside her. Livia gasped at the sudden sensation, her body tightening instinctively around him. Tahoma stilled immediately, allowing her time to adjust, before he began to move again, slowly at first. His finger moved in a steady rhythm that matched the motion of his mouth above. The two sensations together overwhelmed her. The pressure inside her grew stronger, climbing toward something she could feel, building, but could not yet reach. "Let go," Tahoma murmured softly against her. The vibration of his voice sent another tremor through her body. "Stop thinking. Stop holding back. Let your body do what it knows how to do. Fall, and I will catch you." So she did. Livia surrendered to the rising wave inside her. When it finally broke, it shattered through her like a storm. Her body arched violently as pleasure tore through her in bright, blinding pulses. She cried out his name as the sensation overwhelmed her, her body trembling uncontrollably beneath him. Tahoma held her through it, his mouth gentle but relentless, guiding her through the peak until the intensity left her breathless and shaking. When the storm finally passed, Livia lay trembling on the moss, gasping as she struggled to remember how to breathe. Tahoma moved up beside her and gathered her into his arms, pressing quiet kisses to her temple. "I didn't know," she whispered weakly once she could speak. Her voice trembled with emotion. "I didn't know it could feel like that." He brushed her hair back from her face. "There is more," he said softly. His voice held both tenderness and restrained hunger. The rigid length of him resting against her thigh made it clear he was still fighting his own need. "So much more, if you want it." Livia answered without words. Her hand slid between them and wrapped around his arousal. Tahoma inhaled sharply through his teeth as his hips jerked instinctively beneath her touch. Tahoma's body reacted instantly when Livia Hartwell wrapped her hand around him. His hips jerked forward before he could stop himself. The heat and firmness of him surprised her silk-smooth skin, stretched tight over undeniable strength. The contrast fascinated her, the vulnerability of that sensitive flesh paired with the raw power of the man it belonged to. She moved slowly at first, curious, learning him the way he had learned her. Her hand glided along his length while she studied his expression. The way his eyelids fluttered shut and his lips parted slightly gave her all the guidance she needed. Encouraged, she continued exploring, discovering the shape of him, the steady pulse beneath her palm, the subtle tremor that passed through his body each time she tightened her grip. Soon, she noticed patterns. He responded most strongly when she moved her hand in long, deliberate strokes from base to tip. A quiet gasp escaped him when her thumb brushed across the sensitive head. And when she cupped the heavy weight beneath him and rolled it gently in her palm, every muscle in his body tightened with restrained pleasure. "Enough," Tahoma finally rasped. His voice sounded strained as he caught her wrist and gently pulled her hand away. "If you keep doing that," he said, breathing unevenly. This will end before it even begins. He hesitated, searching for words. I want my release to happen inside you, he continued softly. I want to feel you around me, holding me, taking me into yourself. His gaze softened. I want to know what it means to become one with you, even if it's only for a moment. Livia released him and slowly reclined back onto the moss beneath her. She opened her arms and parted her legs without hesitation, offering herself to him. Tahoma lowered himself between her thighs, bracing his weight on his forearms. She could feel the firm head of his arousal pressing against her entrance, hot, insistent, yet controlled, despite the fierce need written across his face. This moment binds us, he said quietly, his breath uneven. Among my people, when a man and woman join this way, their spirits become connected. We carry a piece of one another from that moment forward, no matter what happens afterward. His eyes searched hers. Do you understand what you are choosing? Livia did. The certainty inside her ran deeper than reason. Every step of her life had somehow led to this moment, to this man, this place, this union that would change the course of everything she believed about herself and the world. I understand, she said softly, and I accept it. Her eyes never left his. Bind me to you, Tahoma. He entered her slowly. Inch by inch, he moved forward, allowing her body time to adjust to the heat and fullness of him. Livia had braced herself for pain. Her past experience had prepared her for awkward discomfort. But there was none. Only a stretching fullness that felt strangely perfect, as if something inside her had finally found the place it belonged. The sensation was overwhelming, yet deeply right. When he was finally fully inside her, they both remained still for a moment. The mountain air cooled their heated skin, while their breathing came fast and uneven. She could feel him pulsing inside her, and her body responded instinctively, tightening around him. The intimacy of that connection nearly stole her breath. Move, she whispered. Please, I need you to move. Tahoma obeyed. He withdrew almost completely before thrusting forward again, deeper this time. The sudden movement sent a cry from Livia's lips as her back arched and her nails dug into his shoulders. He found a rhythm quickly. Each movement grew stronger, deeper than the last. Livia matched him instinctively, her hips rising to meet his with every thrust. Pleasure began building in waves. Each crest faded only to rise again stronger than before. Tahoma's hand slid between their bodies, his fingers finding the sensitive center he had discovered earlier. As he stroked her there while continuing his powerful rhythm, the combination of sensations overwhelmed her senses. The fullness of him inside her, the precise pressure of his touch. Together, they drove her higher and higher toward another peak. Let go, Tahoma gasped, his own control beginning to crack. Come for me, Livia. Let me feel you break around me. She did. The climax struck like a rushing waterfall, sweeping away every thought and leaving only pure sensation. Livia cried out as her body convulsed her inner muscles, tightening around him again and again. A heartbeat later, Tahoma followed her over the edge. His body went rigid as he called her name, his release surging through him as he collapsed against her with a deep groan pulled from somewhere deep within his chest. They lay tangled together on the moss, their bodies still joined, their hearts pounding in the same frantic rhythm. Tahoma buried his face in the curve of her neck, his breath hot and unsteady against her skin. Livia gently ran her fingers through his damp hair, marveling at the peaceful stillness settling inside her. It felt like something she had never known before. like coming home. "I'm yours now," she whispered softly when she could finally speak again. "No matter what that means, no matter what it costs." Tahoma lifted his head to look at her. Something deeper than desire shone in his eyes, something steady and enduring. "And I am yours," he replied quietly. "In this life, and whatever waits beyond it." He brushed his forehead against hers. "Our spirits have witnessed this joining. Nothing can undo what we have done." They remained there until the light of the sun began to soften. Before the day ended, they came together twice more, each time slower than the last, more tender, as if they were learning the language of each other's bodies. They explored without hurry, discovering the small secrets of pleasure hidden within each other. Tahoma showed her positions she had never imagined and sensations she had never believed possible. Livia found she loved the strength of his body above her, the sense of being protected and claimed. Yet she also discovered a different thrill when she rose above him, guiding the rhythm herself and watching his expression twist with pleasure. Between their lovemaking, they talked. They shared pieces of their lives that neither had spoken aloud to anyone else. Livia spoke of Charleston, of Elspeth Hartwell's relentless efforts to marry her, off of the endless parade of suitors like Cole Branson, and of Abram Hartwell's quiet kindness before illness stole him away. She spoke of loneliness, of the strange emptiness that came from being admired but never truly known. Tahoma told her of his own past. He spoke of his people, of how many had been forced west by soldiers and government orders, while a few had remained hidden in the mountains rather than abandon the land of their ancestors. He spoke of Awanasa, his wife, who had died of fever 5 winters earlier, and of the child she carried who never lived to see the sun. The grief in his voice told her how deeply that loss had scarred him. "I believed that part of me had died with them," he admitted quietly. His fingers traced slow patterns across Livia's bare shoulder as they lay together beneath the fading sky. "Then you arrived." He smiled faintly. "You walked into my mountains with fire in your heart. I tried to keep my distance. I told myself watching you from afar would be enough." His eyes met hers, but it never was. Livia leaned forward and kissed him. Soft, deep, a promise passing silently between them. And in that quiet moment beneath the darkening sky, it felt very much like the beginning of forever. When Livia Hartwell and Tahoma finally rose from the moss and dressed again, the sun was already sinking behind the mountain ridges. They walked back to the cabin side by side, their fingers intertwined, and Livia knew with quiet certainty that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Whatever future waited beyond those mountains, she would face it with this man beside her. The bond between them was stronger than any rule written by society, stronger than the expectations she had fled. The weeks that followed became the happiest days Livia had ever known. Tahoma moved into Abram Hartwell's cabin with her, though he still kept a small camp deeper in the forest whenever he needed solitude, or when the walls of a house felt too confining for a spirit raised beneath open skies. Together they built a rhythm that felt natural to them both. They hunted in the mountains together. They cooked beside the fire in the evenings. And they loved each other with a passion that never seemed to fade. Livia learned how to follow the delicate prints of deer across damp soil, how to set snares along narrow trails, and how to recognize which plants healed wounds and which ones could poison a careless traveler. Tahoma, in turn, began learning about the world that existed beyond the mountain ridges, the world of books, music, and the intricate customs of the society she had left behind. Many evenings were spent beside the fire, while Livia helped him read aloud from poetry and philosophy. She was amazed by how quickly his sharp mind absorbed every new idea. What took others years to grasp, he seemed to understand in moments. In return, Tahoma taught her the language of his people. He shared words that had no true English translation, words that described the spirit of the wind, the quiet strength of mountains, or the feeling of belonging to the land itself. Some of those words carried meaning so layered that Livia felt as if she were discovering an entirely new way of seeing the world. One evening, he shared with her his true name, the sacred name given to him by his mother at birth. She practiced saying it softly until the unfamiliar syllables rolled naturally from her tongue. They loved each other in the cabin and beneath the open sky. Sometimes beside the spring where their story had begun, sometimes in hidden meadows where wildflowers painted the earth with color. Each moment together felt different. Sometimes their passion burned wild and fierce, driven by a hunger that only seemed to grow stronger the more it was satisfied. Other times their lovemaking became slow and tender, lasting for hours as they explored the quiet beauty of intimacy. Through him, Livia discovered depths of passion she had never imagined existed within herself. She realized her body could feel joy she had never been taught to expect. In Tahoma's arms, she found a freedom she had never known, a life where she was valued not for her family name, but simply for being herself. But the world she had abandoned could not remain distant forever. By autumn, troubling news reached the mountains. Livia Hartwell had hired investigators to search for her missing daughter. The name of the man leading the search, Thaddeus Kincaid, carried a reputation for persistence. That made it clear the trail would eventually lead to Abram Hartwell's old cabin. Sooner or later, someone would find them. And when that happened, scandal would follow like wildfire. So they faced a choice. They could remain where they were and confront the consequences, or disappear together into the wilderness and leave the old world behind forever. The decision came easier than Livia expected. "I will go wherever you go," she told Tahoma quietly the night before they abandoned the cabin for the last time. "Whatever life waits ahead, I will take it gladly, because a life without you is not a life I wish to live." Tahoma pulled her into his arms so tightly she could feel his heartbeat pounding against her chest. In that moment, she knew the truth. Without question, his spirit was bound to hers just as completely as she felt bound to him. Together, they traveled west. They crossed territories where no one knew their names, and few cared about the color of a person's skin. After months of wandering, they discovered a valley tucked beneath a mountain range that reminded Tahoma of the homeland he had lost. There, they built a new cabin with their own hands. Years passed. They raised 3 children together, each carrying the blood of 2 worlds. Their children grew up learning the traditions of both her heritage and his, taught to honor both equally. The life Livia had once lived in Charleston slowly faded into memory. Sometimes, during long winter evenings beside the fire, she and Tahoma would speak of those earlier days, as if recalling a distant story. Far away in Charleston, Livia Hartwell eventually died without ever learning what had become of her daughter. And after many fruitless years, Thaddeus Kincaid finally abandoned the search. In that quiet valley, far from the expectations of polite society, the woman who had once been treated like a prize to be won found something far greater. She became a partner, a mother, a woman whose soul had found its equal. Livia Hartwell lived a long life, though she later took another name among Tahoma's people. A name he gave her on the night they bound their lives together. She never forgot the journey that had brought her to the mountains. She lived to the age of 91. Tahoma passed away only 3 months before she did. Those who knew her believed she simply had no wish to remain in a world that no longer contained him. Their children buried them side by side on a hillside overlooking the valley where they had shared 53 years of life together. 2 stones marked their graves. Each stone carried two names, one in English and one in the language of Tahoma's people, honoring both the woman Livia had once been and the woman she had become. And even now, people living in that valley tell stories. They say that on misty mornings when fog drifts through the hollow and clings to the mountain ridges, two figures can sometimes be seen walking together among the trees. A tall man and a pale woman, hand in hand, moving through the forest like smoke, like shadows, like love itself wandering quietly between the ancient stones, still watching over the land, still guarding the valley, still bound to one another and to the mountains that first brought them together, always. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice imagery and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic, emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.